Nestled at the end of a serene cul-de-sac, 1467 Maple Street was the kind of house that appeared in children's drawings, complete with a wraparound porch, tall windows, and an old oak tree casting shade across the front yard. But for all its charm, the house had a reputation. It had stood empty for nearly a decade, the "for sale" sign weathering through countless seasons. Locals whispered about its past, but no one really knew why it remained vacant. Or if they did, they never said. Sarah and Mark Reynolds, newlyweds with dreams of starting a family, were smitten with the house the moment they saw it. It was everything they had ever wanted. Spacious, yet cozy, full of character, and within their modest budget. The realtor, eager to close the deal, glossed over the house's history. When Sarah asked why such a beautiful home had stayed on the market for so long, the realtor simply shrugged, offering a rehearsed line about the changing economy. They moved in on a bright summer morning, their hearts full of hope and excitement. Sarah had always loved old houses, the creak of wooden floors, the intricate crown molding, and the stories that seemed to be embedded in the very walls. Mark, more pragmatic, loved the idea of a fixer-upper. Together, they envisioned a future filled with renovations, laughter, and eventually, children filling the rooms with joy. The first week was blissful. They spent their days unpacking, painting, and planning out the renovations they would tackle next. The house was in remarkably good shape considering its age. Just a few minor repairs were needed, and Sarah found herself enchanted by the small discoveries they made. A hidden nook behind a bookshelf, old letters tucked away in the attic, and the slight smell of lavender that seemed to linger in the upstairs hallway. But as the days passed, Sarah began to notice oddities. Small things at first, barely enough to register in her busy mind. A door that she was sure she had closed would be ajar. The television would turn on by itself, the screen flickering before settling on a static-filled channel. Mark, ever the skeptic, dismissed her concerns, attributing them to the quirks of an old house. "It's probably just a loose wire or something," he'd say with a reassuring smile. But then there was the tapping. It started late one night as they lay in bed. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone gently rapping on the walls. At first, Sarah thought it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind rattling a loose window pane. But the tapping persisted, night after night, growing louder and more insistent. It seemed to move through the house, echoing through the walls, sometimes in the ceiling, other times under the floorboards. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just the house settling. It was as if the tapping had a purpose, like it was trying to communicate with her. One night, after hours of lying awake listening to the sound, she decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and quietly crept through the house, following the noise. It led her to the basement, a place she'd avoided since they moved in. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. The single light bulb that hung from the ceiling cast long, eerie shadows across the room. As she descended the creaky wooden stairs, the tapping grew louder, more frantic. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The sound seemed to be coming from behind the far wall. She approached the wall, her flashlight flickering in her trembling hand. There, hidden behind a pile of old, dust-covered boxes, was a small wooden door. It was low, barely reaching her waist, and it looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. The wood was dark and swollen from moisture, and cobwebs clung to the corners like delicate lace. Taking a deep breath, Sarah reached out and grasped the rusty metal handle. It was cold to the touch, sending a shiver down her spine. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. The smell of damp earth and something else, something foul, wafted out, making her gag. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow tunnel. The walls were rough and uneven, and the floor was nothing but packed dirt. As she stepped inside, the tapping stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing in on her from all sides. She could hear her own breathing, rapid and shallow, the blood pounding in her ears. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, but after a few steps, Sarah found herself standing in a small, cramped room. The ceiling was low, and the walls seemed to close in around her. In the center of the room was an old, battered wooden chest, its surface scratched and marred as if it had been clawed at by something desperate. Sarah hesitated. Every instant